Alright, well, in the last video we were talking about how we're using a brand new forecasting technique called the LRC, or the Lezak recurring cycle, to forecast months in advance. And this severe weather setup, the potential for it over these next 6 days, were forecasted months ago using the LRC. Basically, to summarize very simply what the LRC is, it's the Lezak recurring cycle, founded by Gary Lezak, president of Weather 2020. And this LRC, is the premise of it is every single fall, early October, a brand new unique weather pattern sets up, and it lasts anywhere from 30 to 75 days, and it usually averages around 45 to 50 day cycles. Then every 50 or 45 days, or whatever the LRC cycle happens to be for that unique year, reoccurs. It cycles over and over and over again through the fall, or the remainder of fall, all of winter, spring, and summer, until a new pattern sets up that following fall. Knowing this very key information, one can use the LRC to forecast months in advance for when these larger scale weather systems are going to track anywhere across the United States and really the world, across the northern and even the southern hemisphere of the planet. Now, the very interesting thing with this is, by knowing this, we already know what the basically weather is going to be like to a point. Obviously, forecasting for a specific city is still going to be very difficult. However, forecasting for a region or an area becomes much familiar, because what we do is we look at the 500 millibar layer, and I'll just show you examples of this coming up here in just a moment. What severe weather setup are we dealing with for this week as we head into the end of the first and the second week of April? Well, there is a marginal and a slight risk throughout the central United States. That marginal will shift more into the Mississippi River Valley, and day 3 down into Texas, day 4 Texas, Louisiana, day 5 and 6 tracking out towards the east and southeast. Now, this pattern that we're dealing with right now, this pattern, here we are, 500 millibar level, this has already happened before, and it will continue to happen throughout the rest of the summer. Of course, it's not going to be identical every single cycle, or really, not really to say it's going to be identical perfectly. But what do we have here? 1 trough, 2 troughs, 3 troughs, a 4th trough, and a 5th trough, with a ridge through the central United States and a ridge off the east coast, a little ridge off the west coast and up into Alaska. This setup at the 500 millibar layer already happened back in October, and this is just the 5th time that this portion of the LRC has cycled through across the world. Here we are. Of course, there are some subtle differences. This is an old feature setup from last year's cycle that got merged into this year's. This high amplitude ridge, and I'm pointing at my screen, you can't even see it, but this high amplitude ridge, this high pressure up into the Hudson Bay, does not happen every single cycle. It has happened twice, maybe 3 times out of these 5 cycles, and to nowhere to this extent. There are some, again, seasonal differences. There are factors to play in, such as El Nino and La Nina. These will affect our patterns in the LRC. The Arctic oscillation, the Atlantic oscillation. There's all sorts of different things that play into how the LRC unfolds throughout the year. But the LRC is the centerpiece and the forecasting puzzle for forecasting long term. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why don't we move this up another day? Pretty similar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 areas of low pressure are building through this ridge up into the central U.S. and off the east coast. Man, sure looks fairly similar to what's coming on right here. Again, not identical, but very, very similar for what has happened and what is about to happen. What are we going to see? Well, this area of low pressure here, our upper level wave, is going to produce severe weather, at least the potential for it in the central U.S. It's going to lift further to the north as our secondary trough digs further down to the south, and we'll get a secondary setup for severe weather down into Texas, eventually working its way into the southeastern portion of the United States. Again, this exact pattern has already happened. As we play this out over the next couple of days, there's our severe weather outbreak, or at least the potential for it, through areas of Nebraska into Kansas, Oklahoma. That shifts a little further north up the Mississippi River Valley, of course, because the jet stream is weaker in October. We don't have that great contrast in temperatures to really get that jet stream accelerating, but this same area of pressure came through. Now, this blocking feature from our old pattern does play a little bit of a factor in here. We don't get the secondary setup because of this area of high pressure, but in the second cycle, we get that area of low pressure to drop down exactly where it is here. But in November, not enough energy or moisture or just the right setup to get a severe weather outbreak or to get any risk for severe weather, really. We're going to go about 45 days, which is, again, the length of the LRC cycle, into the future. So this brings us to the 24th of November. Here we go. October. Yeah, the 24th of November. Here's our low. Again, digging down off the sea. You see, we don't have that high pressure up here in the cycle. I want to point that out, that high pressure system, which was mainly a player in last year's LRC, isn't going to be there every time, but to some degree, we are going to see the anchor ridges, troughs, set up in the same exact spot. Here's our low. Digs down into the Four Corners into Texas, lifts a little further through the Mississippi River Valley and off into the East Coast. Again, we didn't quite have the right things to get any SPC outlooks to be issued for severe weather, but as we head into January, again, 45 days later, and again, our LRC cycles vary about 43 to 47 days this year. It averages at 45 days. We're actually going to go 43.5 days earlier instead of 45. So we'll be a day and a half off on here, but still, that's pretty good for forecasting. We knew, based on what happened in October and the same setup that happened in November, that we were going to see some risk for severe weather fairly likely in January over the week of the 6th through the 11th. And let's just go to those dates and see what unfolded over those days. Here we are on the 5th and the 6th. I'm just going to play this out. Here's our area of low pressure dipping down into the Four Corners, into Texas, producing a marginal risk for severe weather along the Gulf Coast and into areas of Florida. Our secondary low starts to dip down, banging into the portions of the Four Corner states again into Texas. Here's our marginal, slight, and enhanced risk right on the 8th, which just so happens to be 45 days after the 24th of November, and we'll see that pushing off into the East Coast as this then pushes eastward, and we'll get a secondary area of low pressure to build down here as the other one ejects off into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, again, we're going to go 46 to 47 days ahead. Again, averaging 45, but that LRC is between 43 and 47 days. There are factors such as blocking, El Nino, La Nina that speed it up or slow it down just a little bit. But we're going to go to that third week of February here. And we should be able to get in here. Here is the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd, 4th, 5th. And we're going to see our area of low pressure dipping down out of the Pacific Northwest. And because February was a very unique way, we didn't have a very huge variation in temperature because the whole country just so happened to be so warm. That jet stream is a lot further north than it previously was in January and November, thus lifting those severe weather further to the north. But same exact setup. Here's our trough. Instead of digging down into the Four Corners, it's more up in the northwest. And then that's going to build across the central and northern United States, and it's going to produce a risk up again through the Mississippi River Valley and into the Ohio River area of February. Now, again, like I said, the same setup, which had previously already happened, which is really resembling the first cycle right now, is coming through. And then we get our secondary low to dip down like it did in January, and that produces that secondary risk along the Gulf Coast area, and then it'll eventually eject out of the area, and then we focus on our next couple of troughs that are going to dig into the area. Now, I'm already at 9 minutes. I don't want to dig too much further into this, but I'll show you more examples over the days to come and over the next couple of weeks. There's a really great example of a storm that came through the northern plains, producing a very destructive ice storm throughout North Dakota. Millions of dollars in snapped power lines and poles. People left without power for 10 days. That hit on the 25th of December. And I'll just show you it really quick here since we're talking about it right now. The 25th, so right around Christmas time, here is our big ice storm that ripped through areas of the United States on the 25th and 26th. I know a lot of people probably remember this storm because it disrupted holiday travel. Well, if we quickly do what is 45 days after Christmas. That's roughly the 8th of February. If I have the maps for February, which I probably haven't dug up yet. Oh, it looks like I have. Here's the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. Here's our big area of low pressure digging down. You know what this did again in February? Much smaller, of course, not as destructive, but it produced another ice storm, or at least icing conditions with freezing rain and ice accumulation through the northern plains again. And I haven't had time to fill in what the outlook was, but I'm sure that there were some outlooks of severe weather that were issued with this as well. And then that storm then eventually did lift out of the area, and 45 days after February 9th and 8th of 24 is going to be March 24th. What happened on March 24th? Well, I'll try and pull it up here. See, I wasn't planning on showing you this, or I would have had all this information pulled up ahead of time. But let's just check it out. 45 days after the 8th and 9th of February will be the 24th and 25th of March. 24th and 25th, and we're going to use a GIF of North America. See if we can get this to pull in. Here's our big area of low pressure, and it's going to build into the United States. Here we are on the 12Z, the 25th. It's more a bit further south. Again, we had a little bit of a stronger jet stream than we did back in November or February. And then that then does build into the central United States and lift further off into the Great Lakes area, which just so happens again to be 45 days. There's 3 cycles of this same exact setup that played through. Very interesting. I want to know what you guys think about it. Put me down some, or drop some comments down there below in the comment box. I'll try and answer them as quick as I can as well. If any other examples that you would like to see, and I do have several of them, but I can't sit here for an hour and show you slide by slide by slide. So I'll continue to pick out some of these case studies. We'll take a look at them, and I'll even show you what our next severe weather outbreaks are going to be. Take a look at the last video. We looked at that last moderate and enhanced risk that was issued through areas of the Ohio River Valley. Same exact setup has already happened, produced severe weather outbreaks 2 separate times in the previous cycles. That's coming back mid-May. We'll see another 8 to 9 day stretch of likely 5 risks for severe weather. Keep that in the back of the mind. Make a sticky note. We'll make a video here in another 6 weeks when it happens again, as well as what is to come over the next few weeks. So stay tuned.